If you've been following the reaction to the Southport riots, the riots around the country that followed on from the Southport stabbings, I think what you can see is a bit over 50% of the population support the protests, but most really didn't like the violence, the unrest that was associated with the protests, what turned the protests into riots. Only around about 10%, maybe somewhere between 8 and 15%, had sympathy for the riots and unrest themselves. And what I want to ask here is two things. Firstly, was that violence excusable? Was it justified? Has it had such bad effects? Has that been counteracted by good effects that it's had? Should we condemn it? And secondly, what's going to happen next? What I think will happen next as a result of it. Now, when the protests in Southport kicked off, I felt instinctive sympathy for the people doing it, which is unusual for me. Normally, I'm very hard on crime. I don't think we're nearly hard enough on crime in general, and certainly on something like riot, I'd be very tough on. I would, in general, think that bullets are an appropriate response to rioting, and that it saves lives to do so because it quells the rioting fast. And well, if you look at the 2011 riots, I think there were 6 people killed in about 3 nights of rioting. Because what tends to happen is criminals, drug dealers, people go out and they settle scores, which is what seems to have happened in some of the time in the 2011 protests. So, but to my surprise, no, I felt instinctive sympathy for the Southport protesters in a way that I never do for a Tommy Robinson demo or for a Soma Ball cut fest, which generally when they riot, it makes me feel sick. When I see a Tommy Robinson demo, it seems to me to be about multiculturalism and ego, and they're setting off fireworks for no very good reason, perhaps to get a bit of attention and ask for money. Nothing very much. There isn't the motives are different. I think it was the nature of the cause, the nature of the motivation with these Southport protests that made me better disposed, because I think they were genuine. It was people saying, well, there was an organic nature to them. People saying, we're not going to, there's a limit, there's a breaking point to how far we will have these problems of mass immigration foisted on us. And that gave me sympathy for them. What I want to go through is just, that would appear to put me within that 10% minority who have some sympathy for the unrest and disturbances at those protests. But am I right? Is that instinctive sympathy? Is that right? That's what I want to go through here. And I want to look through some of the arguments against the rioting and disorder that happened, and to try and evaluate it. What I'm not doing here is trying to, what I want to do is to go through the points so you can make up your own minds. What I'm not doing, in case Mark Rowley or Yvette Cooper are listening in with their earphones, trying to find, is there something we can get this guy on? This is not me in any way trying to say violence is good, go and do more of it. Next time there's a protest, turn it into a riot. My advice would be, don't do that. Even if it was okay in Southport, that doesn't mean it will be okay on another occasion. Violence and rioting, they tend to acquire a logic of themselves. They get out of control fast, and circumstances change. So simply, if I were to conclude that the disorder that occurred in Southport was right, that doesn't mean that it makes it right all the time. Far from it. It's not. Don't do it. Don't do it again. But that doesn't mean it was wrong on that occasion. I want to try and take a step back and just take a look at what happened at those protests and what I think were rightly in some cases called riots. Okay, what I want to do is first of all is to look at the polls. So if you let me do this, hold on, there. Now that's YouGov has done quite a lot of polling around this. Public reaction to the 2024 riots. Few Britons support the disorder, with the vast majority saying it is unjustified and that the views of the rioters are not representative of the wider population. So if you go down here, I don't know if you can see that, those red numbers, the pink number there is people who somewhat oppose the protests, and the red numbers are people who strongly oppose the protests in general. So it's 37 plus 17. Sorry, that's slightly over 50% oppose the protests in themselves, even without the disorder. Then the unrest at the protests, so basically the violence, you have about 70, I think that's 75% strongly oppose that, and then 10% somewhat oppose that. So it's about 85% are opposed to the unrest at the protests. If I go to the next one there, this is pretty strongly against the violence at the protests. So almost half of Britons now believe right-wing extremists are a major threat following the 2024 riots. That's according to YouGov. So we should not run away with the idea that there is universal sympathy for the recent quite violent protests that went on. I'd say there's widespread condemnation. The silent majority. That doesn't make the silent majority right. Usually people think they are. Maybe they're just silent because they're wrong. So I want to go through that in a minute. But I'll go through a couple more of the polls here. There's this one here on the Mail Online. 1 in 3. Now this one. 1 in 3 Brits support this week's anti-immigration protests, and 1 person in 14 backs the rioting too. Give me a second. There. So what you have there is 1 in 3 supporting the riots and the protests, and 1 in 14 backing the rioting. I think those numbers, they look similar to what was said by YouGov there. So you have about 30% or a third saying, yeah, we support the protests, and about a bit under 10%, 7 or 8% saying that the rioting is okay. And then you have this one from YouGov. What's interesting about this one says that there is more sympathy for the rioters than there was in 2011, and less sympathy for the government's handling of it. So what I think that means is that people don't sympathise with the rioting at all, and not very much with the protests. But the government are blowing it. They are losing support, and that appears to be enhanced by or supported by other polling evidence. But what we shouldn't think is that this is the whole country moving our way. What I think these protests have done, the riots have done, is to create division. They have divided opinion. And the question is whether that is a bad thing. I think it has brought existing divisions to the surface. Now, I think there were 2 things about the riots that I liked when I've looked a bit more deeply at them. The first is that they brought existing divisions within the country amongst us to the surface. I think that is a good thing. I think it is good that the cracks are revealed, that they are made overt, that people can see them, that people talk about them, that they're not gelled over under multicultural and community talk and talk of political unity, and all British people think this, that and the other. And the second thing that I like about those protests, which I think jumped out of them instantly as soon as they came on the screen in Southport, was that they're organic. They're not whipped up by activists. They show, I think, poor people saying we just don't want to take this anymore. We just want to show that there is a breaking point, and that breaking point is embedded. It's embedded amongst us, and it won't be bought off with little bits of welfare payments here and there. Okay, so what are the contrary arguments? Well, I think the first one is that those riots will be used as an excuse for state repression. That's I think that is people who say that are right. I think Mark Collette has said that. I think he is right to point that out. I think that is happening in front of our eyes now. My reaction, coming from the point of view, the more sort of anarchistic point of view that I come from, I think that's probably a good thing, because I think that repressive fear-mongering, that deterrence or terror the mild terror and fear that the government wants to impose, I think that's going to come at some stage anyway, as the state collapses. I think we're living at the beginning of the very, very beginning, or the introduction to the end of the age of the state. And as the state breaks down, I think it will thrash about and try to repress and to use fear in order to regain control. We might as well have that out early, in order so they learn early that fails, rather than have that come out when things are really starting to get bad. So now the second argument against any sympathy for the rioters is secondly that people get hurt. I think that's undeniable. I have to agree with that. People do get hurt when there's rioting. I don't like seeing coppers getting bricked. I tried to find on Twitter a video of a copper in Southport. He's standing by. He's obviously been told to stand by a police van and guard it, and he takes quite a large brick to the back of the head, and it pretty much knocks him out, and he's semi-conscious on all fours. It's horrible to watch. I just don't like that. That guy, that constable, that police sergeant, he is not responsible for the dreadful mistakes and the political obsequiousness of the senior ranks. My understanding from the few coppers that I've spoken to is the people they dislike most of all, even more than the politicians, are the senior coppers, who are more interested in pleasing the politicians than in the work that coppers have to do. That's what they tell me. I think they are almost, what I'm told is they're absolutely despised by the junior ranks for that reason. So I don't think it's okay simply for I don't like seeing some street copper getting bricked and knocked out. It's just that's just nasty. And similarly, the one where I saw a couple of East Europeans, I think when the BBC said that, I think they meant Romani gypsies. But that's my guess as to who they were. They blurred out the faces when they got pulled out of their car and chased down the road, and then their car vandalised and set fire to. That's just nasty. I don't like that. I don't think that adds anything to. I don't think it helps anyone. I can't see what benefit that brings. It doesn't. It doesn't even. I don't think it even shows the government. Listen, we're at breaking point here. I just think that's nasty. That's sadistic. And similarly, setting fire to a migrant hostel. The problem with that is that fire can get hold pretty quick, and you could see quite a lot of people killed, which is those deaths would be unnecessary, and so that's unnecessary deaths. Well, that's bad. That's murder, or equivalent to murder, arson with intent to endanger life. So I didn't like seeing that. The counter argument that was put to me, which I actually think is by someone on Twitter, which I think is pretty good, is, well, at least during the period of those protests, there were no enrichment stabbings. And the timeline makes that argument very plausible. Because what we saw was, I think on the 29th of July, that's when the Southport girls got stabbed. On the 30th of July, that's when you had the memorial where people were gathering, and that's where you had the first protest, the riot in Southport. I think, my understanding is it was triggered not by fake news, but because someone who may have been Muslim, we don't know because the authorities haven't told us, he was in amongst that memorial. Apparently he was arrested with a large knife on him. That's what I read online. That seems to have been the evidence. I think that was the immediate trigger for that riot, and not fake news about the Rwandan guy having been Muslim. So, but anyway, on the 30th of July, that's when you had that protest. And then I think that spate of protests that went on to Wednesday the 7th, further protests were due to happen on Saturday 10th of August and didn't really happen. And that was when I think we knew that this spate of protests, of rioting, that it was over. And then lo and behold, 2 days later, on the 12th of August, you get the Leicester Square stabbing. So the timeline, it looks pretty plausible to say during that period of rioting and protesting, at least that deterred foreigners from carrying out stabbings on our soil. So it's plausible. I can't say exact cause and effect, but it's plausible to say that those riots might have deterred something much worse. What you can say is that what I noticed from all those riots around the country, I'm not aware that anyone was hurt so bad that they are still in hospital now. Any of the policemen were taken to hospital to get treated. I think anyone who might have been hurt or injured in the Southport riots is no longer in hospital. So that suggests to me that although the riots were pretty intimidating, pretty intense, the lethality of the violence was pretty low. So So that counter-argument, I don't think that's enough on its own to say that people get hurt as they did. Then thirdly, the third argument is simply that when you have a riot, you get looting. And that's right. There was the clip of Greggs and then O2 and some sports shoe shop getting looted, and then Lush, that bath store, bath and soap store getting looted. And that is degenerate. That again, all that does is to encourage a lot of hostile, anti-white, anti-protester memes saying we're all a bunch of pigs. All we want to do is loot, and I think that's what the people who were there did. Wanted to go and loot Greggs. That is the main thing about that is degenerate. In the scheme of things, I think that is fairly small. That is property damage. That is bad, but I think those stores. I don't want to justify or excuse it, but I think when you put that against the mass immigration invasion that's being forced upon us by successive governments in direct breach of all their promises, I think that is small. And if that was the price we had to pay to put a stop to that mass immigration invasion, I think it would be difficult to say that it's not worth it. But query whether it will stop that mass immigration invasion. So. What I don't think, and I certainly don't think one good effect that I think that looting would have had is that lawlessness will have challenged the politicians' authority, and I think it is good for them to understand that, because it makes them understand that there is a limit to what they can foist on us. So again, this is not me saying looting good or looting doesn't matter. Go looting. Next time there's a protest, take the opportunity to loot. No, all of those things are wrong. I'm saying the opposite of all of those things. But I'm saying in the scheme of things, it's probably fairly small. In the historic scheme of things, it's not that great. If you look at, say, a point where we are now and the point where I think we are likely to end up where we want to be, where we can accomplish quite large-scale, peaceable repatriation, if you draw that line, I don't think that looting puts us very far off that line, is what a smooth line towards a decent end. But again, that is not me trying to justify or excuse it. Now, the fourth argument that you could use about the rioting is rioting is always wrong in a democracy. You can change things at the ballot box. You can vote. Well, that argument, simply to say that there is a voting nexus every 5 years, that voting nexus argument, that is wrong. There is also what's called democratic accountability. Politicians have to justify their actions and their policies and what they do, and they have to do it by consent, with the consent of the people. So a continuing interaction with the voting public, not simply opening the door, coming out through the security, past the security fence, putting on their clown outfit, getting on the unicycle and saying vote for me, and then going back in and slamming the door for 5 years. They have to continually engage. That is democratic accountability, and that the mass immigration that has occurred, that has been foisted on us, that is in constant flat breach of any democratic accountability. It's against what we want. It's against what the polls show we want. It's against what politicians have said they're going to do. It's against our interests, our economic interests, because it put the ordinary people, the bulk of the mass of people who earn less than the average wage, it makes those people poorer. It reduces and dilutes people's income, and it increases their expenses, particularly capital expenses like rent, like housing. It's intended to do that. The purpose of it is to make the poor poorer, the bulk of people, you, poorer. It is very much part of the poisonous English class system. The rich people, people with power, people with wealth, wanting, as has happened for centuries, as they generally always want to do, to squeeze, suppress and exploit a lot of poorer people in order to preserve their own position and make themselves richer. And that is what I think mass immigration is about. I don't think there's any other reason. About power and transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich. And it's been very effective at doing that. But even if I'm wrong on that, we have voted against mass immigration. We've done it explicitly at, I would say, the last 5 elections, well, certainly the last 4, 2010, 2015, 2017, 2019, all of them contained, or all of the manifestos, the Tory manifestos, contained explicit promises that they were going to radically reduce immigration, not just illegal immigration, they were going to stop that completely, and they were going to reduce legal immigration to below 100,000. And, or except the last one, which said they would control immigration, they didn't give a number. And even the Labour Party manifesto of 2005 said that we would have this magical thing, the points-based immigration system, that panacea that will cure all our immigration problems. They said they would do that and they didn't. And they said we would have strong and secure borders. All of that's been ignored. So we have voted against it, and they have simply gone against it. So it seems to me the politicians, when the politicians do that, when they all club together and do that, they are asking for violence, because they're effectively saying, there's nothing you can do. We're going to foist this on you against your will. You have no choice. What are people supposed to do in response to that? That is the politicians' fault. Now, one argument the politicians might say is, well, you can vote for another party. You didn't have to vote for us. And well, what other party? All 3 of the main parties, they have done it. Tories, Lib Dems and Labour. So they might say, well, you could start up your own party then. Well, that's actually very difficult within a duopoly. Maybe you go for reform, but reform, what are they saying? They're saying it'll be net zero, which means 500,000 people coming in every year. So I don't think you can argue we're a democracy. I think the democracy argument actually, surprisingly, that comes out, that almost justifies, certainly excuses the rioting, because the democracy angle has shown doesn't matter how you vote, we're only going to do the opposite of what you vote for. You vote for a reduction in immigration, we will ramp it up nearly vertically. So I just don't think that argument cuts any ice. What I would say, my personal view is it's a bit more subtle than that, and that is that the real crime that governments do is to make people dependent upon them by making us reliant upon welfare and by grinding us down by things like mass immigration, loose monetary policy. I would say feminism as well. It's a way of making ordinary people poorer, making labour cheaper, making the grunts cost less and the grits cost more. So I think that has been done to make us more obedient, more compliant, more dependent, more dependent on government to provide us with welfare. And I would draw an analogy with the girl who is made dependent on her Muslim rape gang pimps. They make her chemically dependent on drugs, and they will beat her and grind her down. And then she becomes dependent on them and gets used and abused by them. And no, you wouldn't dream of saying to one of those girls, well, you could have just gone away if you didn't like them. You could have left them. Well, actually, that is what a lot of police and some social workers were saying about 15 or 20 years ago. Oh, these are just out of control girls. They're making a choice. So and I think it is wrong to say to make a population so dependent on welfare and to do it so deliberately, and then to say, well, you should be able to act as free agents. and I think that is what has happened. And finally, I think fifth or sixth here, the final argument against excusing the riots or the disorder at the protest, that is that it was unnecessary. I think actually this is the strongest argument. What I want to do, the way I want to illustrate this is by looking at, if I go here. Now, if I look at this, if I show you that, that's where Keir Starmer visits Southport and he gets a very hostile reception. And then to look at the interview that he carried out afterwards. That's, if you bear with me. But what I do is I like to play those, and the point I'm making is that there was no violence there. They just made catcalls at him. But you can see that seems to be the thing that visibly shook the politicians, Starmer and Yvette Cooper. So let me go ahead and I'll just play those two videos, the first video and a little bit of the second video. Okay.
Go outside our streets, Prime Minister. How many more children? How many more children, Prime Minister? Are we going to do something? What's going to stand up for our children? That. Bye-bye. Got your photos, off you go. Make a real change, Prime Minister. Make a real change! Get our children! Go away!
I just found out my friend's 9-year-old daughter was killed.
You don't want this!
The person I've held as a child, and you can't do shit.
My respects to the victims and families who are going through raw pain and grief that most of us can't imagine. I can't imagine as a dad myself. I am very worried about high levels of knife crime, and I'm absolutely determined that my government will get to grips with it. But today is not the time for politics. Today is the time to focus entirely on the families who are going through such pain and grief, and on the wider community, and of course a time to say thank you to those that responded yesterday.
The point there is that that rioting, the disorder, may have been just unnecessary, because what you saw there was hostility at that wreath laying, pretty universal shared hostility amongst people of Southport. And what you saw afterwards, you saw how frightened, how worried, how confused Starmer looked. He was really shaken simply to have had such an unfriendly reception. I think what it looks like to me is he thought, great, I won this landslide majority, everyone loves me, it's a huge mandate, isn't this great? And then he's turned up and he's found actually people don't love me. This is a shock to me. Why is this happening to me? He's not very bright, Starmer, and he's not very imaginative. He doesn't seem to have much sense of humour either. So he's not particularly good at using his wits to think his way around a situation. His default response, I think, is to stamp on things. I think that simply getting such an unwelcoming reception at that wreath laying, it's possible that was enough on its own. I'm not so sure about that. I suspect if those protests hadn't been as spirited as they were, if there hadn't been so much unrest, I think if they'd just been completely peaceful protests plus that angry reception at the wreath laying, I suspect Starmer would have gone away, calmed down, and been able to persuade himself, his colleagues and other people, well, this is a one-off. This isn't really about immigration, multiculturalism, mass migration. This is about economic conditions. This is about welfare. They want a little bit more community spending in that area. They want more opportunities. And we can blame, it's the Tories' fault that they fouled up the economy, and now people are angry about it and they're taking it out on us. And those protesters would still have been called far-right thugs, except I think the difference would have been, well, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. I think the spirited nature of those protests shattered that delusion. And my evidence for that is the fibs, the outright, I think, lies that Starmer chose to tell. Now, his line was that what you had was basically a rent-a-mob, some roving, flying thugs going around the country stirring up trouble. He talked about, in his press conference a couple of weeks ago, after he'd been to Southport, he talks about thugs bouncing from chief constable to chief constable. He's got a strange way of talking, very crude, and lumpish as well. These thugs move from community to community. That is probably not the case. If you've been paying attention, just looking on Twitter, you could see that those protests at Southport, they were local, they were organic. I've read online, perhaps someone could verify this for me, I'm not certain this is true, but I've read online that 75% of the people who've been convicted coming out of those protests were people who lived within 5 miles of the protests where they were arrested. That suggests it was local people protesting, that it was organic. And I think that was obvious from the start. Similarly, when those protests spread around the country and you had different protests in lots of towns on the same day, I think, again, that showed that it can't be roving thugs going around the country from one community to another, because they wouldn't be able to be in loads of communities at the same time, would they? And they can't go from one chief constable to another chief constable if it's just this group of roving thugs. So, and similarly, the fib that's been put around by the press, that what caused the riot was the fact that someone said wrongly that the stabber in Southport was a Muslim. I don't think that is what triggered it. I think the trigger was that someone, as I've said, someone at the memorial for those girls who people took to be a Muslim. We don't know because we haven't been told. He was arrested. He had a weapon on him, and that made people think not only are our girls getting stabbed, but someone turns up at this memorial with armed to stab people, and that's what appears to have triggered the riots. So the fibs suggest to me that the government has to take these protests seriously, and because of the fact that because of the unrest that was involved. And secondly, an additional lie is that these are all far-right people. These were local people in Labour voting, quite heavily Labour voting, some of them, Labour voting constituencies. So it's not likely that all these people were far-right. And without the disorder, I suspect that those fibs would have been maintained, they would have been kept going, they would have been shoved through, and the whole protest would have been jolted over. That's my guess. It would have been a shock to Starmer, but he would have got over it. Unfortunately, I think this is the nature. When you get governments that want to be repressive, it does deny people. It kind of it denies people the opportunity to respond with reason. It means people have to push back with force, and that tends to come out in very ugly, disorderly, disorganised ways, particularly when it's organic or rising from the grassroots. It's not planned, it's not directed, and then that's where you get this kind of disorder and rioting. And again, I think that again it comes back. I lay it at the door of the authorities. Okay, give me a second. And this is what I think would have happened. I don't know why it's Bracknell News reporting on it. Starmer announces support for Southport on second visit after knife attack. And the measures the support he's going to give, the measures announced on Friday included mental health support, so a few therapists I guess, for those affected, and a programme of events and activities to help build community cohesion and bolster local resilience. So a little bit of money, a little bit of support groups is, I'm guessing, what it is. And I think that looks foolish because of the nature of those protests. And I cannot think if those protests had been completely peaceful, it would have enabled a man like Starmer to say, to persuade the people around him at least, that these problems could be massaged away with a little bit of money and a little bit of group support. So again, that probably puts me within the 8% or 10% or 7% of the population that have some sympathy for the fact that these protests had unrest and were right, had an element of I hate to say it, but sort of violence, were riots. And I'm probably somewhere within the 20% nearest to that view, the kind of top 20%. I'm not particularly proud of that, but I think that's what circumstances have forced us to on this occasion. And I should repeat, this is not me calling for violence. I'm not saying violence okay, rioting good, next time there's a protest, throw a brick, go and riot, hurt a policeman. None of that. I'm saying don't do that. Violence is unpredictable. It gets out of hand fast. Just because no one was doesn't appear to be seriously hurt at those last riots, that certainly doesn't mean that no one would be hurt in future riots. I'd feel really bad if someone lobbed a brick at a cop, he gets hit on the back of the head and dies, and then the person said, well, Gavin said it was okay to riot. That is not what I'm saying. I'm saying the opposite. Okay, Yvette Cooper, if you're listening, get stuffed. That's not what I'm saying. All right. So the next one is what's coming. What are they going to do to us? Well, the first thing that I think is coming, it's already come, that is repression. That is Keir Starmer's personality. I think he is a repressive individual. I think he's just repressive and a bit dull. In internet terms, the word is midwit. I think he probably gives life to that internet term, gives meaning to it. We saw these qualities of repression and dullness coming out in the Rochdale by-election, where he fired his own candidate out of hand and handed the by-election to what's his name, the Respect guy. Hold on, let me just look up his name. George Galloway. I think Starmer handed that election to him because he just stamped on his own candidate, because he didn't like what his own candidate was saying about Israel. And this does tune in with what David Starkey has said about Keir Starmer. He's done a couple of interesting videos. I'll just show you one. I won't play it, but I think it's quite good what he says about Keir Starmer. So you have that one. It's worth a watch if you get the time. It's about an hour. He's talking about Keir Starmer, and there's another one. This one, Sir Keir Stasi, David Starkey on Labour's police state in Britain. Now the point he's making, just to summarise, is he describes Keir Starmer as a plodder, a rule maker, somebody who wants to make rules and wants to be the person applying them, with people like him applying them, ruling over us. He describes him as being oppressive, with a penchant for secret police methods and an inquisitorial security staff. I think that's the way David Starkey would describe him. Particularly focuses on two very senior civil servants who seem to be very powerful within the Starmer government, Sue Gray and Oliver Robbins, who are both intel people. He calls them the Starmer Stasi, setting up the Propriety and Ethics Committee, and one of his job is to gather information on people. I think David Starkey is suggesting that they're actually going to do that on us, and I could believe that. I think, for me, I think Starmer, he only really knows one way. He's proud of his ability to be ruthless. I think he just likes to stamp. He's a bit like the Hulk smash or Starmer stamp, and he doesn't really have the raw IQ and imagination and sort of humour and wit to think his way around a problem. I think he wants to stamp on it if he doesn't like it. I think it could prove to be extremely repressive. I found no evidence of him trying to increase people's freedom, trying to disapply laws, trying to persuade government to repeal laws that restrict our freedom. Including with the Communications Act of 2003, which I'll come to in a minute. Now, the next thing I think that there'll be is a bending of legal procedure. I think we're already seeing that, and to a certain extent a bending of the law, it seems to me. But the people who are bending legal procedure, that starts with the police, and let me bring up this. Now this is the Home Office making it clear what they want police to do. More than 100 arrests. These criminals, haven't been tried, may not have been charged yet. These criminals will face the full force of the law. That's not ideal for the Home Office to go around saying that. And then you have this one here. If I can play this video, I'll just play it in silence. You don't need to hear it. Now, tell me that the Home Office there are making you feel better disposed to police and police methods. That is atrocious propaganda. That's the sort of thing that I think Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer would put out. Actually, I don't think they can do propaganda. It takes skill to do that, and that is what's said is that the main purpose of propaganda is to humiliate rather than persuade, and I certainly think that's true of that propaganda. And the police would have taken that message on board, and I think they are taking that message on board. And I think suspects who are were arrested at these protests. I think they're getting lent on pretty hard. The reason I think that is the speed with which they're pleading guilty. I suspect the police are leaning on them to waive their rights to legal advice and to do an interview without a solicitor present, and to plead guilty fast in order to go in front of a judge fast. I think the system is being directed improperly that way. And if you look at, there's a tweet from Robin Tilbrook, which I'll find just here, hold on. That one there. That is Robin Tilbrook. He's saying this about this fella Lee Joseph Dunn. I'll come to him in a minute. He was imprisoned for memes, and memes that seem to have been completely truthful, completely quite matter of fact, stating the obvious. And what Robin Tilbrook is very good lawyer. I think he's a good lawyer. He's done some excellent work bringing some of the, I think, one of the grooming gang perpetrators to justice in the civil courts. His greatest mistake was not to follow the crystal clear legal advice given in this video. That video says never talk to the police. And I think what Robin Tilbrook goes on to say is these people, his view seems to be that these people are maybe waiving their right to legal advice, and that's not what they should do. I wonder if the police are sort of encouraging them to do that. Now, if you want to see how fast people can get jailed, then there's this gentleman, Wayne O'Rourke. I think he went under the title "Sick of It" on Twitter. I didn't know him that well. I didn't follow all his stuff, but he was. I'm told people said what a nice fella he was, a loyal guy, and I think he got sentenced within about 3 days of getting arrested, 3 or 4 days. I mean that's extremely fast at any time. That's very, very fast given the delays in the legal system at the moment. So pressure is being applied. I have a sense that some of these cases will turn out to be quite a stain on the legal system. I think people are pleading guilty to things they really shouldn't plead guilty to, and they shouldn't get charged for. And I suspect that some judges shouldn't accept those pleas of guilty. Here's one. There's the Army veteran who didn't hit anyone or didn't throw anything, is locked up for a year. Hold on. What the judge said, there's a quote from the judge a bit further down, where he says, "You are the person that provides me with the most difficulty, because it cannot be levelled that you hit anyone. Neither have you thrown anything, neither is it said that you spat at anybody." But he said that anyone who is party to this disorder has to receive a custodial sentence. I think what was said, he was making a nuisance of himself. And I mean, is that really a crime? I don't think that's a crime. He questioned why the charge of violent disorder, which is a very serious crime, that's a serious charge, was brought against him. I think that judge should have refused to accept that guilty plea. What it looks like is that defendant was really quite keen to plead guilty, and the judge was quite reluctant to accept his plea, but he accepted it anyway. I don't think he should have done so. And that makes me wonder what's going on to make people so keen to plead guilty. I just don't know. But it does make me suspicious of police methods. Now, the next thing I think we're going to, place where I think we're likely to see bending of legal procedure is amongst prosecutors. Now, the current Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP, he interestingly said that Keir Starmer was an average DPP and relied too much on advice. He didn't say he relied too much on advice from this or that person or that quarter. What he said was too much on advice. I think that sounds like he was saying Starmer wasn't really very bright. He got other people to do most of the detail work for him. So anyway, but this guy, he has said that he's proud to call himself an ally. If I bring this up and show this to you, this is quite good stuff. This is where I think he's a bit embarrassed about it. I don't think this guy's all too bright either. So if he's saying Starmer's not as bright as all that, then well, that's not a good sign. This is a blog post that the now DPP wrote before he was DPP, when he worked for this firm, Kingsley Napley, and what he's saying is, I am now. Let me highlight that. I am now proud to count myself as an ally, but my experience of being any sort of ally began almost 3 years ago when I became an LGBTQ ally, etc., etc. Now, what he's saying is somebody who makes a stand alongside them, black and diverse colleagues, against prejudice. So I find that a bit that's questionable for a prosecutor to have that idea, that self-image, that idea of pride in their identity, particularly when it comes to sensitive issues like race. That suggests to me that he wants to jump at the opportunity to show that he is rooting out prejudice, standing up against prejudice with or beside, alongside black and diverse colleagues. And I think this has been, you can see this, this is enhanced, so this is supported by an interview that he gave later, which I'll bring up now. Now, this is the head of the DPP, Stephen Parkinson, and he's been asked, this is the DPP, the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, and he's being asked about impartiality of the Crown Prosecution Service, and this is now once he has become DPP. And so I'll play this little clip because I think this is quite revealing.
Previously voicing support for Black Lives Matter, for example. There was a report from the Policy Exchange think tank claiming the CPS had been unduly influenced by Stonewall, for example. Is it impartial?
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. And to be honest, I'm not going to apologise for the fact that the Crown Prosecution Service is listening to communities. I mean, I've been here all morning, it's been really interesting. And of course, there's a lot of engagement that goes on between the police and communities, and also the Crown Prosecution Service and communities. We absolutely need to listen to the experience of people who are not the same as us. But the decisions that we make are for us. And that's the distinction that I want to draw.
That interview is worth watching if you want to watch more of it. It goes on for about 45 minutes. He's a boring man, but and he's under pressure, and he knows he's under pressure. All that nonsense about engaging with communities. Communities doesn't mean indigenous British people. It means black and brown people. That's what that means. And what does it mean? That you're supposed to be independent, impartial, and not influenced. Prosecutors should not be influenced by community opinion like that. That's not the basis. It's whether there's a realistic prospect of conviction and whether it's in the interests of justice to pursue a prosecution. And that really shouldn't involve succumbing to the pressure from the community. Sorry, from communities. The community was the word that was used before the era of mass immigration. Now we are all communities except for the indigenous Brits. And what he also talks about is dedicated police officers scouring social media. And that is quite interesting. I'll come to that in a minute under censorship. All right. Now, the next way that I think legal procedure, or the law is getting bent, is with legislation and charging. And the fellow who, the former army veteran who got imprisoned for memes, let me bring up his case now. Hold on. Here, this fellow, David Atherton, gives a summary. A group of men, Asian in appearance at Egremont Crab Fair in 2025 with the caption, "Coming to a town near you." The second showed a group of men, Asian in appearance, leaving a boat to the Whitehaven beach. This, said Mr. Shea, had the caption, "When it's on your turf, then what?" A final image showed a group of men, again Asian in appearance. That seems to be the words that he was getting convicted for, Asian in appearance, wielding knives in front of the Palace of Westminster. There was also a crying white child in a Union flag t-shirt. This was also captioned and said Mr. Shea with the warning, "Coming to a town near you." That is getting sentenced for memes. And what he got charged under was a catch-all provision, Section 127 of the Communications Act of 2003. That's basically if you use electronic communications equipment, i.e. any way of communicating other than sitting next to someone on the sofa and talking to them, then if you say something that's grossly offensive to pretty much anyone, then you are guilty of a crime. It is as wide as that. It sprung out of a Tory party moral panic in 1984 when BT got privatised, and they were worried about people using the privatised phone network to make heavy breathing phone calls. I've done a video about this act, the Communications Act. I'll leave a link to it below. I'm not going to repeat a lot of that here, but simply to say that grossly offensive has been defined by a judge or interpreted as meaning whether a message is couched in terms liable to cause gross offence to those to whom it relates. i.e. if I say something bad about black people, and if a black person would be grossly offended to hear about it, then that would mean that would make me a criminal if I sent that via text message. If I said it to you like in my living room, it wouldn't be. So basically, anything you do with anything that requires a battery, then that's far too wide. And Starmer has never recommended that get repealed, even when he was DPP. He sort of did his middle of the road thing, saying, well, on the one hand, on the other hand, people should be free from being offended, basically, or being grossly offended. So that legislation is basically something you use when you want to get someone, but you don't have anything that you really can get them on. Like that fellow who tweeted out some memes, saying what I think is probably fairly true, given the government wants to spread mass migration or distribute it throughout the whole country. It probably is coming to a town or village near us. I think that's just reality. So that's one catch-all mechanism. It should not be there. It's getting used. I think it's going to be deployed more and more to get people that the government just doesn't like. And I think that's in Starmer's nature to do that. Secondly, you have the crime of sending false information via the Online Safety Act. Let me, if I can bring that up. Give me a second. That's this. Section 179 of the Online Safety Act of 2023. That's not Starmer, that was the Tories. You commit an offence if you send a message and the message contains information you know to be false. At the time of sending it, the person intended the message to cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm to a likely audience, i.e. someone who might encounter it, and the person has no reasonable excuse. That's a horrible one. So it's not you have freedom of expression. You need to have reasonable excuse in order to make a mistake. And this is being interpreted very, very widely. With this lady here, woman who posted fake name of Southport attacker says it destroyed her. That's Bernadette Spofforth. I think she's been charged. I have the impression from the reports I've read that her lawyers are saying she shouldn't be convicted and she should plead not guilty. And again, the process is the punishment. I think that's what's happening here. She's getting punished for doing something the government thinks might somehow have contributed, even though it was innocent, have contributed to the rioting. Now, what she tweeted was Ali al-Shakat was the suspect. He was an asylum seeker who came to the UK by boat last year and was on an MI6 watch list. If this is true, then all hell is about to break loose. Well, she is not. She's saying if this is true, and also if it is true, I think it's possible that all hell, the protests might even have been even worse than they were. I don't think that meets the test from the Online Safety Act there, where the person sending it knows that the information to be false. So I think that is an oppressive prosecution. That Online Safety Act is certainly being interpreted very, very widely. That is catch-all legislation designed to basically get people from making a mistake, even though her mistake appears to have been an honest one. They don't like her, they want to get her. The other bunch of people who I think are bending legal procedure are, yes, you guessed it, the judges. So if I bring up this one, if you can see that, judge warns people observing or participating in disorder will be refused bail. That seems to me to be against, according to my rusty and perhaps outdated understanding of bail, that seems to me to be not his decision to make, because there is a right to bail. In the same way that the Online Safety Act says you have to have a reasonable excuse to pass some comment to get it wrong. No, you shouldn't. If there is anything like free speech, you don't need a reasonable excuse to speak freely. In the same way, you have a right to bail. You have a right not to be imprisoned. And this judge appears to be saying that people, well, what he's saying is people observing or participating in disorder will be refused bail. And what he says further down is that someone's presence, including a curious observer at disorder, involves them in such disorder as he refused 2 bail applications. So he's saying those, in the paragraph above, the judge in Belfast has warned those caught observing or taking part in public disorder will be refused bail, as 4 men appeared in court charged in relation to recent riots in the city. And that would include a curious observer. The problem that I have with that is that people have a right to bail. You have a right not to be imprisoned. You have a right to be set free. What the Bail Act says is that that right to bail can be revoked. You can be remanded into custody if there's a chance that you might fail to surrender, if there's a chance you might commit further offences whilst on bail, or if there's a chance you might interfere with witnesses, or occasionally the seriousness of the offence in itself, that might lead to bail being revoked and you being remanded. But people who are charged with more serious offences than these, I'm thinking of rapists here, they are routinely let out on bail. I read recently on Sky some KC saying that there's an average of 5 years between a rape complainant being raped and her giving evidence in court, an average of 5 years. And so if you were to remand every rapist or person accused of rape, that person you'd be remanding people for 4 or 5 years. So I think my brief experience from a long time ago is that rapists are routinely granted bail. They need to be in special circumstances not to grant them bail. Like they might go and commit another rape. They might try and interfere with the rape victim and trying to prevent her giving evidence. But I don't think any of those conditions, those criteria, apply in this case. There's no suggestion these people are going to fail to surrender. There's no suggestion they're going to commit further offences if they're granted bail. There's no suggestion they're going to interfere with witnesses. What that judge is saying is that if you're involved in this rioting, it's so serious, you're just not going to get bail. Now, I think I see a pattern there insofar as I've observed. What surprises me is the number of defendants in these riot cases who have been held on remand. And what occurs to me is this could be one of 2 things. Either it's a way for the courts to say, we're going to punish you, so even if you get off, you're punished. Or more likely, I wonder if it is a way of squeezing vulnerable working class defendants who don't know the system, are not used to engaging with authority, into pleading guilty by saying you're going to go inside anyway, you might as well get it over with now, and get your sentence, plead guilty, get a shorter sentence, and get on with it, because you'll be remanded in custody even if you plead not guilty. I wonder if that is part of the purpose, in order to stamp down again legal procedure. Well, that is the law. If that's the case, that is the law getting bent. I think the number of people getting held on remand shows the law is being directed, improperly directed. I think there's impropriety there, to put it politely. Okay, so that's the bending of legal procedure. I think that is a big thing that is happening. I think the next thing is censorship. You're seeing people calling for censorship. There's quite a lot of calls for that in the press. This one I found surprising. Jonathan Friedland, should be on trial for the UK's far-right riots. Elon Musk, and direct guilt sits with those who brought violence to our streets, but their hatred is inflamed by lies spread on X. So, basically, what I think what he's saying is X, Twitter, is too free. Too much free comment is allowed, and that causes these riots. So, I think that is calling for a curtailment of free speech, censorship, and and that, I think, that point of view is shared by that chief prosecutor who we saw a while ago. Let me bring up another article that involves him. Here he is again talking about terrorism offences, publication of law firms as targets could be terrorism. Top prosecutor warns. I don't think that. I would say that's perfectly covered by the offence of attempting to pervert the course of justice. I wouldn't. I think terrorism is just, we never needed that. Crimes against lawyers are not new. We haven't needed terrorism charges to do with them in the past. I don't think we do now. But what the particular quote that I want to bring up is, bear with me, this one here. If you retweet something, you are republishing it. We have dedicated police officers whose sole task is to scour the internet, scour social media. This is what they're focusing on. So he's doing a lot of scouring there, that fella. Now, he has a censorship frame of mind. Now, that supports my view, that enhances my view that what we're going to get is, we're moving away from what governments have been doing for the last, at least a decade, which is, I think that what they've done is to say, it's embarrassing for us to dirty our hands with prosecuting people for speech crimes. What we're going to do is to lean on and squeeze. We're going to get together and squeeze the social media monopolies and get them to do the censoring for us. Then we can say we've got clean hands, we're not censoring anyone. It's the social media companies doing it. Musk has blown that apart, and the other social media companies, they're basically having to follow his free speech lead. And the people in power and the people who think they're part of the establishment, they don't like that. Journalists, mainstream media, they want to be the arbiters of truth. You get this with BBC Verify. They feel that their profession is draining out from underneath them. They don't like that, and so I think that they're now coming back, and the politicians, a man like Starmer particularly, is starting to think, and I think the politicians in general are starting to think, right, we can't rely on the social media companies to do it. Musk won't let us. We can't prosecute him. America has a Second Amendment. There's no alternative. We're going to have to dirty our hands with prosecuting people. We're going to have to go in with the meat fist, and we're going to have to stamp on people. And I think that prosecutor, he appears to be going along with that. I think Starmer is in favour of that. I think that is likely to happen. We're going to see more and more hate speech crimes getting prosecuted. We've already seen that with Sam Melia. You can Google him, look up his case. He is not the last by any means. I think his view at the time probably was that they're coming for me now, they'll come for other people next. So you might want to support him now. All right. If you want a good summary of what that censorship is going to look like, then you can see this video from Paul Joseph Watson. He does a good job of summarising those cases. This is just, all right, here we are. That video there, this is just insane. It's about 8 minutes long, does a good job, gives a good summary. So that's censorship, we're going to get more of that. The other thing I think we're going to get more of is kind of soft welfare handouts, community handouts, handouts to the public sector to keep the Labour's constituency on board. That is their new constituency. It is not the white working class. It's people who work for the state. That's their core constituency. That's a big constituency. I think we're going to see a lot of handouts in those areas in general. If I go back to this case in Bracknell News, remember that the measures that were announced for Southport included mental health support for those affected and a programme of events and activities to help build community cohesion and bolster local resilience. I think we're going to get a lot of that, and that I think is supported by what the media are calling for. If I show you this case from the BBC, there's BBC talking about hold on. Starmer will be judged on how he tackles root causes of the riots. And it's interesting, what does the BBC say are the root causes of the riots? Well, I reckon it says that some in the Labour Party want their leader to call out racism as a major factor, and others diagnose poverty and lack of opportunity as a root cause. Mental health and addiction. Men in their 50s and 60s have appeared before judges, as well as 13 and 14-year-old boys. And then the BBC goes on to say, most of the towns and cities affected in recent days have high levels of deprivation and above levels of asylum seeker housing, according to analysis of Home Office statistics. So I think probably what we're going to see is a bit more welfare spending, government spending, if they can. They haven't got the money to do it, but they'll try in those areas. I think they'll also try to disperse asylum seekers around the country, which is already being said. The Labour Party are already saying they're going to do, so that it goes into every town in the country. So it's not just in certain pockets, particularly in the north. And I think there's quite an interesting chain of causation here, because what you get is Starmer. He's very committed to Israel. I think he said he would support Israel without reservation or unconditionally. Hold on. There it is. He said, I support Zionism without qualification. Now that seems to me to be quite a strange thing to say in terms of geopolitics. I don't think he would say he supports America. If I said, Mr. Starmer, do you support America without qualification? I think he would say, well, it depends what they're doing. You'd have to ask me at the time. Well, I guess that means I don't support them without qualification, because if they're doing something bad, I won't support it. But so I don't think he'd say that about it. I can't think of any other country he might say that about. Now that in turn upsets, that alienates Muslim votes. So he needs to try and make it up with the Muslims. So what he's doing there is going on their side politically against indigenous British people and saying we're going to protect our communities. What he means by that is black and brown people. That then alienates indigenous British people, and so he has to make it up with indigenous British people. And I think the way he's going to do that is by trying to find a bit more spending that he can lavish on communities to create community cohesion. Basically, spending a bit more money in the area, trying to buy friends in those areas. And so at the end of this, the tail end Charlie of all of this, I think is going to be the taxpayer, the people that he hits with tax. Where are those taxes going to come from? And so it's an interesting chain of causation. I think maybe it starts at Israel and his support for Israel and the way it alienates Muslims, and it ends up taxing people more in order to spend money on alienated indigenous British populations. So I think that's the way it's likely to go. Now, the final thing that we're going to see is failure. We are going to see, I think we're going to see more of these enrichment stabbings. We're going to see more outrages from immigrants, and maybe a bombing or two. And that's not going to go away. So the pressure is going to keep building up. And I think Keir Starmer, during his school history class, I think he might not have been paying attention, otherwise he would have heard. we all heard about the pressure cooker theory of history in our history class. So you get alienation, pressure building up within society, and you repress it by putting more weight on the pressure cooker. But you can only do that so long. It's a bad strategy because eventually the pressure builds up and you just can't contain it no matter how many weights you put on that pressure cooker. And I think that is going to happen. And I think that could happen sooner than Starmer thinks, because he might want to be repressive, but he doesn't have the means to be repressive. The means aren't there. Just Google the crisis in the prison system. You'll come up with loads of articles. I want to deal with a few of them here. The aim seems to be to empty the jails, to make some room in the jails in order to imprison rioters and to give extra early release to criminals, but not to people who are convicted of riots. That's what is being said. And the problem with that is there just isn't the room within the prison system. If I show you this article, this is Yahoo News from Sky News. Prisons feeling the pressure from wave of UK riot charges as impacts of surge may take weeks to peak. And then the service currently has fewer than 700 free spaces available in the Mail estate. It considers itself in operational trouble if they have fewer than 300. Or this one from the Yorkshire Post. Government has major issue as justice system corrodes amid prison crisis. That was from 16th of August, yesterday. And what it says is there, hold on, bear with me. The figure leaves a bitter taste and one which will concern those who already despair of law and order in this country. Our front page today details how more than 250 offenders with over 100 previous convictions were not jailed in 2023. And then it says that Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood, who said she had no option but to set free 5,500 inmates early, with prisons projected to overflow in September. That's in 2 weeks' time. Or this one from News UK, from The Standard. Criminals exploit court delays doom loop to avoid justice, warns Casey. The Bar Council chairman says increasing chances of escaping conviction are driven by record trial backlog has led to a collapse in the percentage of guilty pleas. Basically, what he's saying is that criminals are choosing to plead not guilty because the delays are so long, the system might not get around to putting them on trial and they'll just get off completely. And so what that does is it means fewer and fewer people plead guilty. The opposite of what has been happening in these riot cases. People then refuse to plead guilty and think, well, I'll get off because the delays are so great. And maybe that's what Starmer was saying when he was saying you'll come to justice quickly for these for the recent protests. Basically saying you can't rely on delays to get off, which apparently seems to be happening within the legal system. That is the doom loop. Finally, this one from the Justice Gap. I don't know who they are. They talk about the law and justice and the difference between the two. We cannot delay any longer. Our justice system is at breaking point. Serious recorded crime is rising. Victims wait years for their trials, and our prisons are squalid, overcrowded, and increasingly dangerous. Our justice system is at breaking point. All too aware of these issues are the overworked and burnt out practitioners on the front line. So it goes on like that. The point is that the state, I don't think it has the means to repress the discontent about mass immigration if it continues to bubble, which I think it probably will, because I think you will continue to get outrages from immigrants and illegal immigrants. What else can they do? They can't make makeshift prisons because all of the places, so RAF camps, ex-army camps, they've been taken up as asylum camps, asylum shelters. So where can they make makeshift camps? Hotels? Well, again, they've been taken up by asylum seekers. Well, where are they going to store these prisoners? Perhaps they might come up. I don't think there are other alternatives to prison that they can come up with, like forced labour in the community. I think that would soon get the nickname gulags to people really. Does Starmer really want to be responsible for imposing forced labour? quite apart from the human rights law implications of that. Perhaps huge fines for people who've got some money, and the denial of welfare for people who haven't got any money, so they're maybe out on the streets, sleeping under a bridge. Maybe that's what they'll do. Again, I can't see them doing that. I think they're going to hit the buffers with this repression policy. I just don't think they've got the room. They haven't got the means to keep it going with what's likely to come in the future. And I think that the current round of fear that the government has managed to impose on people who were, by imprisoning people who were at those protests, and by imprisoning people who've put out posts that the government don't like, I think that fear is going to wear off at some stage. And then what do? They just don't have the ability. They don't have the means for Stalinist terror. Are they going to resort to Stalinism, dragging people out of their homes in the middle of the night and taking them and executing them? You don't need prison room for that. I don't think they're going to do that yet. You never know what happens. I think the political authorities will turn out to be surprisingly ruthless when they see the system crumbling, just slipping through their fingers. But I doubt that they'll resort to that. They might, but I don't envisage that at the moment. And so there's no guarantee that the government can deal with the illegal immigrant and immigrant stabbings and other outrages that are likely to come. Now, if this comes to a head, I don't think it will come to a head. I think it'll come to a head sooner than people like Starmer realise, but I still think it will take years, simply because the majority of the public don't have my sympathy for those protesters and rioters. The majority of the public are flat dead against it. The majority are against the protests at all, and very much against the unrest and disorder that was associated with those protests. So I think this is still going to take years. This might buy some time for the government. And what I think it means is probably bringing it to a head won't be immigration and multiculturalism that brings immigration and multiculturalism to a head. It will be jobs and welfare, the economy. And that brings us back to our old friend, financial breakdown. I think that is what is going to break the system. I think that is what is going to get people to wake up en masse. The economy breaks down, people find they're no longer dependent upon the state because the state isn't there anymore. It has broken all its promises to look after us, to provide welfare for us, even to provide basic healthcare for us. And people will get angry and reject the state authority. And people, I think, will then wake up to the issue of mass immigration and multiculturalism. I think that is when it is likely to happen. I have no control over that. I'm not sure who does have much control over the timing of that. But in the meantime, there are people in jail. And what I hope people can do, what I hope we can do, is to write to the people who've been jailed for this, even if you don't agree with what they've done. Not to write to encourage or justify what they've done, but just to let them know they are not forgotten. That will mean a lot to me when they come for me. I think it would be a good thing to do to these other people, particularly the people who've been jailed just for posting stuff on the internet. So I think that would be a nice way to end, a plea to go along with campaigns. I think Patriotic Alternative, I think they may be coming up with a campaign which seems completely worthwhile to me, to write to people who have been jailed. So perhaps we can do that. That's a good thing to do. But otherwise, we just have to weather the storm at the moment. Thank you.